All right, welcome to our monthly walking workshops. Typically the way that this goes is I have a bunch of questions that you guys have have asked, and then I spend time answering them. But this month is March into May, and so we have a workshop based on our theme. So if you're unaware, March into May is an annual program that we run that runs the last week of March into May. And it is a friendly competition program where we can walk and compete on steps, and it's in a team session. Um, However, we also have different themes each year. So this year, we're doing walking through time. And with that comes some really fun historical facts and just interesting information when it comes to the history of movement and just human history. And so today, for our walking workshop, we're going to focus on NASA and the moon, and some fun facts and history about that. And then starting next month, we'll get back onto our normal routine of me answering questions for you guys. Um, but I've had a fun time learning about NASA. So, in case you didn't know, NASA stands for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and it has just a really fascinating history that spans almost 100 years at this point. Of groundbreaking space exploration and scientific advancements. So, just some fun facts about the history. So, pre quote unquote NASA space efforts was happened before and during World War II, particularly. So, before NASA was established, the United States had already made significant strides in aeronautics and space exploration, particularly during and after World War II. The US military had various research agencies that were involved in early rocket development, leading to some successful tests and research. And then, of course, I'm sure as most of us know, what really started our NASA program was the Cold War rivalry. So during the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union in the 1950s, this played a significant role in the birth of NASA. The Soviet Union's launch of Sputnik 1, which was a satellite in October 1957, was the first artificial satellite to orbit the Earth, and it sparked fears in the US about the technological gap and potential security risks that introduced into our country. And so this event was a turning point and led to an increase in government funding and a push to advance US space technology. NASA was founded in 1958, specifically on July 29th, under President Dwight D. Eisenhower, following the passage of the National Aeronautics and Space Act. The purpose of NASA was to ensure that the U.S. would lead in the field of space exploration, scientific research, and NASA's formation marked a shift from military-based rocket development to a civilian space program with broad scientific and exploratory goals. The 1960s was the space race and the Apollo program. So the Mercury and Gemini programs were NASA's first early missions, and they were focused on human spaceflight, starting with the Mercury program, which spanned from 1958 to 1963. And the goal was simply to get an astronaut into space to orbit the Earth. In 1961, Alan Shepard became the first American in space, followed by John Glenn, who became the first American to orbit the Earth in 1962. And these missions set the stage for then the Gemini program, which ran between 1965 and 1966. In the 60s, President John F. Kennedy set the ambitious goal of landing a man on the moon by the end of the decade, and this became the cornerstone of the Apollo program. The program's key mission was to land humans on the moon and then return them safely to Earth. And so there's been many movies created, right, about Apollo 11 and Apollo 13. But Apollo 11 was the landmark mission where astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first humans to walk on the moon on July 20th, 1969, while Michael Collins orbited the moon in the command module. Apollo 13, which happened in 1970, was intended to be the third moon landing, but because of an in-flight explosion causing a life-threatening emergency, the crew had to return safely to Earth. And it also started to show the efficiency of NASA's crisis management as well as their problem-solving capabilities, since they were able to get all of those astronauts back home. And then the third kind of era of NASA is the space shuttle era. And this lasted between the 1970s and the 1990s. And this is when NASA shifted its focus to a reusable spacecraft with the Space Shuttle program. And this continued all the way until 2011. The Space Shuttle was designed to be a reusable vehicle capable of carrying astronauts and cargo into orbits, and it was pivotal in the constructing of the International Space Station. And so with that, there's lots of different things that you may be familiar with, right? So there's the Space Shuttle Columbia that was in 1981, and this was the first shuttle flight. And then in 1986, that was the Challenger disaster, which was one of the most tragic moments in NASA's history, when the Space Shuttle Challenger broke apart in 73 seconds after launch, killing all 7 crew members. And this accident led to a hiatus in space shuttles and a reevaluation of the safety protocols. Also, what falls underneath this era is the Endeavour and the Hubble telescope, which is the shuttle fleet deployment of these satellites in the 1990s, which really revolutionized our understanding for the universe. And then we have the International Space Station and space exploration, which is kind of where we're at right now when it comes to our NASA progression. The International Space Station was created in partnership with international partners like Russia, Canada, Japan, and the European Space Agency, and they work together to build the space station. And it has become a hub for scientific research in space, specifically studying things like microgravity, physics, biology, and medicine. It was launched in 1998 and it remains operational today. Since then, we've had also lots of different things like the Mars rover and robotic exploration, as well as the Voyager probes. The current program that NASA is working on is called the Artemis program. The Artemis program aims to return humans to the moon and establish a sustainable presence there by the end of the decade. The Artemis program, the goal is to involve landing the first woman and the next man on the moon and paving the way for future human exploration on Mars. This comes in 3 different phases. The first phase has actually already been completed, which was Artemis 1. This was an uncrewed mission that happened in 2022 and that landed on the moon and launched testing of the Space Launch System and the Orion spacecraft. Artemis 2 is the goal to land humans on the moon again. This was originally supposed to happen in 2023, and then it was pushed to 2024, and now has been pushed all the way to 2026, just due to more testing that's needed. And with Artemis 2, they won't actually land on the lunar surface. This is just a crewed test flight. So there's still lots of work to be done with that. And NASA is still planning on that crewed test flight in 2026. Okay, so that was your little history lesson of NASA. But being as we are employee wellness, I of course wanted to talk about the massive impacts that NASA has had on our own health and medical systems. And there has actually been quite a few. So even just becoming an astronaut is a very rigorous. It's a very rigorous process. And the program is quite rigorous in and of itself. So in order to be selected as an astronaut, you have to have a very, very strong educational background, typically in engineering, physical sciences, biological science, or mathematics, because a lot of what you do as an astronaut is research based. They have to have significant experience in their field, often with more than just a master's. Um, and then they have to be able to work very well under pressure and be physically fit. And because of that, once you get through that initial screening, there's a lot more that goes into it. Because space is so physically demanding, astronauts must stay in peak conditions to cope with the challenges of microgravity and long duration space flight and the physical stress that comes along with it. And so, with this, they've developed a lot of different key ways that help with um, our astronauts, not only physical, but psychological health as well. And so let's talk about some of those things. So, what are some of the things that have come out of NASA's research that have contributed to the advancements in our health and medicine technologies here on Earth? One of the first ones I want to talk about is our MRI. So, MRI stands for your magnetic resonance imaging scanner. And NASA was involved in the early research of magnetic resonance as a method of imaging and developing technology for space flight, which led to the improvement of the MRI machines on Earth. NASA's research into space exploration required non-invasive methods to monitor the astronauts' internal health. So this led to the development of high-resolution imaging techniques, which helped improve MRI scanners. So we had MRI scanners, but even those images just weren't the best. And so through NASA's research, they were able to improve those techniques. And because of that, today, MRI is a critical diagnostic tool used for detecting conditions like tumors, brain injuries, and heart disease. They also played a role on the computed tomography or your CT scanners, um, since it used very similar type of imaging needs. And then one of the things that you might not know, but that had a huge impact, especially during the COVID years, is NASA's technology on telemedicine. And while it may seem so normal today, telemedicine had a profound impact on healthcare, particularly and still does today in remote areas. Telemedicine was created because they needed to be able to have a way to monitor our astronauts while they were in space, and also gave those astronauts simple trainings, right? How to take their own blood pressure, how to check in each other's ears, how to accurately read a thermometer and know the best places to take your temperature, things like that. So those were things that they were trained, and then that would allow doctors to treat patients from a great distance. And so during long duration space missions, astronauts rely on telemedicine to communicate with doctors for on Earth for health assessments. And NASA is actually the one who developed technology for transmitting that medical data from the spacecraft to Earth, which has now been adapted for use every day across the world. And it particularly aids rural and underserved communities. And so that was a huge stride that, like I said, it may seem so simple because it seems so everyday and not a big deal now, but that made a huge impact on our ability to be able to meet with doctors virtually. Another thing that NASA's program has helped with specifically is bone health research. In space, astronauts experience bone density loss due to the absence of gravity, which leads to a condition known as spaceflight osteopenia, which is a form of bone thinning. NASA's research on how weightlessness affects bone density has contributed to advancements in understanding and treating bone loss in people on Earth, particularly in conditions like osteoporosis. some of these treatments have led to large improvements for the bone conditions here on Earth. So, for example, the oh man, I'm bad with word. Okay, so it's phosphonates. There you go. It's a class of drug that helps prevent bone loss. That basically came out of NASA's insights with astronauts' health. And so now it's been developed and is now used in treatment for osteoporosis, but came from NASA. Other things is the exercise device called the ARED, which is Advanced Resistive Exercise Device. This was designed to help astronauts maintain bone and muscle mass in space. And some of this technology has been adapted for physical therapy and rehabilitation on Earth. When I was doing my studies for the like what NASA has done and the effects it's made on medicine today, this is one that came up in like every single paper, article, podcast that I listened to was this ARED device. And so I had to do a little bit of research because I didn't quite know what it was. But basically, it's a resistant machine. So think of when you go to the gym and there's all of those workout equipment. Anything that uses resistance, basically what the ARED does is it takes all of that functionality and puts it into one simple machine. So this way, when astronauts are up in space, they're still able to train their muscles, and so that they don't atrophy and so that bone still stays strong. And so this was something that once again was created for the use of astronauts, but has now been implemented in physical therapy and rehabilitation units, simply because of its versatility, because it can basically do what 20 machines can do in one, which is pretty cool. And then last but not least, oh no, there's a couple more. Is the spacesuits and life support system. So because, of course, we can't breathe in space, NASA had developed life support systems, which provides astronauts with breathable air and temperature regulation. These have since been developed and adapted for use in medical applications, such as respiratory therapy for those patients with lung disease. And then the pressure suits, which is designed as compression garments, have now been used in patients with conditions like deep vein thrombosis and chronic venous insufficiency. And once again, this is medical technology that came from our research on how to support astronauts in space. Also, things like heart rate monitors, specifically wireless heart rate monitors and other cardiovascular tracking devices, were used to, once again, keep an eye on our astronauts in deep space, but has paved a way for better heart health monitoring systems for patients here on Earth. And these devices are now used every day in hospitals as well as in homes to monitor patients with heart disease. NASA has also allowed for a more rich understanding on the importance of fluid around the heart, and has helped us understand how our bodily fluids move, specifically blood and plasma, toward in the upper body. And this has allowed for development of treatments for patients with fluid retention or heart failure, which is pretty cool. And then robotics. So robotics has been kind of a huge tipping point when it comes to modern medicine and the ability to use robotics in surgery. And the Da Vinci surgical system, which is one of the most widely used robotic surgery platforms on Earth, was inspired by NASA's advancements in robotic technology. The precision of these systems allows surgeons to perform minimally invasive surgeries, which reduce recovery time for patients and improve surgical outcomes. And this came from, once again, that advancement in NASA's research. And then also, NASA has worked on robotics for rehabilitation therapy, helping develop exoskeletons and robotic limbs that assist in patient recovery after injury or stroke. And then last but not least, NASA's development of lightweight, flexible material for space exploration has contributed to the advancement of prosthetics and artificial limbs. By applying the technology that they developed for spacesuits and other aerospace applications, researchers have created more comfortable and functional and more durable prosthetics. So, all that to say that NASA has done some pretty amazing things when it comes to our medical and healthcare advancements. And so then before we end, I also just wanted to cover the importance that NASA places on psychological training. We talk a lot here at Employee Wellness about the importance of our mental health. And I think a really good example is the importance that NASA puts on their astronauts' mental health. And they go through a very rigorous process when they are selected to become an astronaut for NASA, to know if they can handle the stress and anxieties that come from a space mission. But on top of that, they're also met with a whole team. So when it comes with our astronauts, they have dozens of people looking after them. Not only doctors and nurses that they meet with on a daily basis, but also psychologists and psychiatrists. And when they're on the International Space Station, they are assigned a psychologist and a psychiatrist that meet with them weekly for a minimum of 15 minutes to be able to evaluate. And I know you may be thinking, well, 15 minutes isn't very long, but for the year leading up to their mission, they meet with these psychologists very, very regularly, weekly, if not more frequently. And this is so that these psychologists and psychiatrists have a really good idea and understanding of how these astronauts function and how they think and where their worries and their stressors are, so that they can be able to create that psychological resilience that are just needed to cope with the stress, isolation, and confinement that happens during these long missions. And so, not only are these astronauts trained right in scientific endeavors, they also have a lot of psychological background and they're trained in stress management techniques and how to maintain daily emotional well being. And because of that, part of their missions has to do a lot with working collaboratively with other astronauts and that social factor, and being able to take all their meals together. So up on the space station, they take meals together to allow for that social connection that's vital to our psychological and physical health. They also are able to communicate with their family members and get into contact with mission control as frequently as they need. And so, not only, right, is it important that they're able to exercise while they're up in space, they also have to exercise their mind and maintain their mental health, which I just thought we could all take a lesson from, right? If our astronauts need that much work and attention, so can we. We can use that in our day to day life, making sure that we recognize and know how to manage our stress and maintain our emotional well being. And then, of course, I'd be remiss to mention um, their incredible workout routines. Because they live in microgravity, it takes even longer for their body to feel the effects of their exercise. And so each astronaut upon the International Space Station exercises for 2 hours each day. And they have, like I said, they have the A-RED machine that's actually up on the space station. They also have a bike, just like our stationary bikes that you have here on Earth. They have that, and then they have a treadmill. A fun fact about the treadmill is actually sits on the wall. And so they're technically running sideways, right? They're running up the wall. And they use bungee cords to anchor them down so that they're getting that resistance and can run. The bike also doesn't have a seat because there's no need for a seat in microgravity. It does have handles on the side and kind of like a little back pad to keep them upright, but there's no seat. So those are just some fun facts for NASA, and the idea of being able to walk on the moon and all the training and the advancements that go into allowing humans to do that. We have a few minutes, and I just wanted, of course, I'm going to share my screen now, but to mention that, right, typically we do these question-based for our monthly walking workshops. And so I'm just going to throw up on the screen our QR code. So if you're ever interested or have a question that you would like me to chat about, you are welcome to scan the QR code, put your question in the chat, and use that. And then I also want to mention that we have our 5K coming up. That is in 2 weeks, and we would love to see all of you there. It'll be from 4 to 6 at Veterans Memorial Park in West Jordan. And if you are on a March into May team, if your entire team shows up, each of you will get extra points. There will be some snacks for after the race. It's a walk or a run. So if you don't want to run a 5K, that's okay. You can just walk it. And that is on Friday, May 20. Oh, I don't want to tell you the wrong date. It's going to be May 25th from 4 to 6 at Veterans Memorial Park. And we would love to see you there. You can just sign up on our calendar page on our website. All right. Does anyone have any other questions for me? If not, I'll let you get back to your day. Thanks for joining me and learning a little bit about NASA and what it takes and all of the huge medical advancements we've had because of them. So thanks for joining.